Hello, friends. This reflection is for the 17th Sunday of Ordinary Time. A little over a year ago, I remember attending a pre-Jordan class, and I'm sorry, not pre-Jordan, pre-Cana. And during that class, it was an opportunity. Well, of course, it was. I remember the deacon there, and I actually knew him personally because I went to school with his oldest daughter, and he would he actually laid out everything that's going to be required for the day, in which the first thing he reminds us it's more than just a check box, to prepare for sacrament and matrimony. And in the class, which it was very engaging, it was very well structured, and honestly, it was fun. And he made sure that everybody had fun, and it was not going to be just like a boring day where they had to check it off, to make the pastor happy and what have you. So, but the one of the first things we did was we got to know everybody that was in the class, and we shared the story of how, in my case, how my fiance at the time, and I met, and of course we also. And also in the class, they also did other things too, like some of the potential scenarios are going to happen when you are married. And I have to say, it was something that I would never forget. It was a day that my wife, my now wife, and I will remember for the rest of our lives. And I highly recommend, if you are involved with pre-Cana at your church, I guarantee you should be doing things that would engage the people and not just make it boring. Talk about this, talk about that. You got to make it boring and make it, fun. Okay, but that's a topic for another time. For the 17th Sunday of Ordinary Time, we hear from the Book of Kings about King Solomon, who is a son of David, by the way, and of course is in the lineage of where Jesus comes from, in which in this first reading, we hear about King Solomon engaging in a prayerful conversation with God. And he shares with us okay, well, what would you like from me? And then, of course, King Solomon, he could say, I want all the money in the world. I want this, I want that. But in the end, King Solomon chose to have wisdom. He chose wisdom. He chose an understanding heart to judge people and distinguish right from wrong. So in other words, justice and mercy he wanted. That's how he wanted to rule his kingdom. Now, to go back to the story I shared a moment ago, I was really fascinated by some of the stories of the couples that were in there with my time, like, of course, my wife and I, when we were engaged at the time, and we were like practically 6 weeks out from our marriage, and we wanted to make sure this was done before. My pastor's like, well, why the heck didn't you do this? And I'll never forget some of the stories we told. And when it came for us to tell our story, I couldn't help also but to mention that I prayed for a spouse that would see me for who I was, who would not judge me for my past, but for who loved me the way God made me to be. Yes, I made mistakes and everything, but I longed and prayed for a spouse that was going to love me for who I am, not what I was, for eternity. That is the end game for anyone who is discerning marriage. You want someone that will love you for the person that you are, not what you were. Yeah, you made mistakes in the past, you did this, you did that, but that doesn't define you. What defines you is your heart for God. And that's what we see here in the readings chosen for this Sunday. We look at the Book of Kings, we already covered that. But the Book of Sirach gives us a very powerful account. Happy the man who meditates on wisdom and reflects on knowledge, who ponders her heart in his way and understands her paths. He will lean upon her and not fall. He will trust in her and not be put to shame. She will exalt him above his fellows in the assembly, she will make him eloquent. It's pretty deep, isn't it, right? But this is the same mindset we need for those of us who are discerning marriage. This is the blueprint to finding someone that will help you get to God. In the Gospel of Matthew, it continues with the parables, by the way, it reminds us that it's similar to what we see in King Solomon, but we hear about the treasure and the pearl in the parable. It corresponds to the very call and purpose of God in our lives. What is the purpose? Is to conform ourselves to the image of his Son in all his glory. So, in other words, Jesus calls us to be like him. Father Jacques Philippe reminds us, only a peaceful heart is capable of truly loving. Remaining calm in the face of trouble, uneasiness, and interior disturbances is necessary in order for God to act in our lives. We are still called to grow in love, and our lives can have the fruitfulness we are called to have if we can accomplish this inward peace. So, in other words, in the parable that talks about searching for the kingdom of peace, we need to get our interior house in order. And we need to seek the wisdom that God intends for us to seek, not what the world wants us. Father Jacques Philippe also tells us that peace doesn't come from the world or exterior circumstances, rather from our communion in faith and love with Jesus, the Prince of Peace. It is the fruit of prayer. And every time we pray, we petition, we praise, petition, in other words, we ask, like, hey, Jesus, this is what's going on here. Can you help me out? Another way of praying is, praising, thanking God through the good and the bad. I think it's important that we continue to seek the wisdom of God. And his wisdom has really changed my life, and I've offered that in return. In Psalm 119, one of the verses that really jumps out at me goes, "Wonderful your decrees, therefore I observe them. The revelation of your words shed light, giving understanding to the simple." He also continues, "For I love your commands more than gold, however fine. For in all your precepts I go forward, every false way I hate." So the psalmist really gives us a challenge that every false thing that comes before us, we must resist. So friends, as St. Paul wrote to the Romans, "For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified." Let's face it, we are not far off, friends. God calls us to be on his path to greatness. How do you plan to perfect it? How do you plan to seek his knowledge, to seek his wisdom, and pass it on to others? And if your interior life does not have a lot of peace, well, thank God, God awaits you in the greatest sacrament of mercy, reconciliation. Seek it. Because St. Augustine reminds us that our hearts will rest in the Lord when we seek him. Seek God and his wisdom. God bless.